Prior to the pandemic, the Alberta economy was already going through some tough times, but how has COVID-19 affected the real estate market? Joining me now over Skype is Courtney Atkinson, a Lethbridge real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates. Courtney, welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So please tell us, what is the Southern Alberta real estate market looking like these days with all this COVID craziness going on? I would imagine overall sales have been probably less than they were prior to lockdown.
Yeah, we saw a fairly dramatic change in attitudes and real estate volume by about March. We were actually trending to have a very good year from a sales standpoint. So in January and February, we were up 5% and 10% respectively. And then things started trailing off as soon as the announcements were made that COVID was a real thing and it was having a real impact. And so we did see a pretty good dip through March and April for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, have people been afraid to purchase or even look at homes because of COVID? Or are you finding that it's just kind of business as usual? Those who want to buy a house are just willing to get out there and, look at houses?
Yeah, I would say that in March, there was a high degree of caution across the board. Everybody was really, really worried, and there was a lot of news feeds just really heavy with news about COVID. And I think it was really overwhelming for all of us. None of us really knew what to expect. None of us knew what the economy would look like in 4 to 6 weeks. And there was a lot of information, and I think it was just overload. And so that manifested through March being fairly quiet. And in real estate, those statistics will show up the following month. And so what that meant was that very few offers were written or received in March. And that meant that by April, we had about 50% fewer transactions happening than we did back in 2019 March. So there was certainly a significant change that happened in that period of time, but we're actually swinging back up. Like even in May right now, when you look back year over year, we're only down 25%, and the trend is looking really good for June. So it's almost as if the nerves that people had in March have kind of worked their way through, and people are feeling good again and starting to realize that, hey, listen, you know what? Our government's done a great job at social distancing and having programs in place to encourage us to be responsible. And now we're kind of seeing the fruits of those labors. I think we really paid the price, I think, in March, and now we're starting to see that pay off.
For sure. I was actually going to ask you too, since some of the restrictions have been lifted a little bit the past month or so, and particularly even like into this week, are you finding that people are feeling a little bit more braver now to get out there?
I would say so. When we first had the announcement made in March, like everybody, we implemented policies and procedures that would help protect our families and the families of our clients. And it was high alert. There's no question about it. I think everybody in the industry was very worried, and we weren't sure what that would look like. And so were all of our clients. Now that we've been through that and we've kind of heard the news load lighten a little bit and our caseload in Alberta lighten a little bit, and indeed in Canada, I think the attitudes of people have lightened and kind of, and certainly spring helps too, having the fresh air and getting people outside tends to be a little bit more kind of encouraging. And so, yeah, I would say the attitudes have changed. People have loosened up. We're seeing fewer people concerned about what the protocol is, fewer questions about how we're navigating the process. And I would say now the shift has been that it's more our elderly clients, folks that would have justifiable reasons for being more concerned, whether they're immunocompromised or, they're elderly. They want to know exactly what we're doing to protect them. And it's our duty to have those systems in place for sure, all across the industry. In many markets across North America, real estate was not deemed an essential service. And the feedback was that the market really wanted that. There were still a number of people that wanted to buy and sell, but for whatever reason, the governments were not allowing it. So we're very fortunate in that respect. And I think it's paid good dividends in our market. We're seeing it rebound quite nicely.
Yeah. So what kind of restrictions were you putting in place? And like right now, you're saying the seniors are mostly the ones that are concerned about that. What sort of things are you doing for them for safety?
Yeah, for our team, there were a few protocols that we implemented, and a lot of it we had already had in place. So much of what we do is virtually because of the nature of our office structure. We have offices across Southern Alberta. So we meet a lot virtually anyway. And we've had virtual tour technology with our company for a long time. And so it really just meant that we were making sure that any prospective buyers had reviewed all of our virtual tours, that they'd reviewed all the photographs, that they had all the information about the property. And then for showings, we were limiting them to one person with one realtor, and they were expected to wash their hands in the property, wash their hands as they were leaving the property. Some were opting to wear masks, although that wasn't part of our protocol. At that time, it wasn't really something that was generally accepted to be beneficial, so we didn't implement that. But now for our clients that do prefer that, we certainly do. And the main thing is just maintaining that social distance and making sure that we're limiting as much exposure to people's properties as we can. And for those that want to go ahead and make an offer on a property, of course, there's other stakeholders that want to be involved. And if it's the property that they intend to move on, then we're okay letting a few more people in. And most sellers were okay with that too. They just didn't want open houses and that sort of thing. We're still not permitted to do open houses. So
yeah, that was actually one of my questions. I was wondering if are you still holding open houses, and also has this affected, or did you see mostly in the springtime people not putting their houses on market as much because they don't necessarily want a bunch of strangers, traipsing through their house? Did you find that at all?
Yeah, good question. I think to address the first part of that, with the open houses, it wasn't a major concern for us. In fact, we were happy that that was the case. It limited exposure and really caused us to be able to meet people who were very interested in particular properties, and then gave us an opportunity to very carefully mitigate risk for the sellers that we represent. And then on the other side of things, I think that the other folks that were, attempting to list their properties and were thinking about what they were going to do in the spring, I would say that there was a fair chunk of them that were deferring through that March timeframe. But the interesting thing that happened is that when they did hit the market, we were seeing uptake happen really quickly. We were seeing a lot of competitive offers, a lot of multiple offers, a lot of really strong offers coming to the table. So it was almost like there was pent up demand in the buyer side that wasn't being met by sellers. So when they finally realized that there was still opportunity, I think they were met with enthusiasm and encouragement. So it was good news.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, I'm just wondering how helpful was the use of your technology? Like you were saying, you kind of use that a little bit, but for example, like using a drone, for example, to do like a virtual tour or anything, was that really being utilized more so than normal?
Well, I wouldn't say more so than normal for us, because we do that with all of our listings. So the virtual tours, the aerial photography, professional interiors and exteriors, that's just part of our program. I would say across the industry, the access and the requirement and the expectation that the market would have for those things certainly went up. I would say one of the most interesting things for us was that, we had been meeting by Zoom or Google Hangouts as a company for a long time. And the thing that we really noticed, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of your viewers, we were just really missing each other. Like as a company, we really just missed seeing each other around the office and doing our work together. And despite seeing one another on a computer screen, we were just starting to feel like, oh my gosh, when is this going to get over? And I think collectively as a community, a lot of that happened at the same time. We were keen to get back to work and see one another. Folks were keen to get out and see properties. They were keen to get moved again. And so I think collectively, it's almost like we all had these same feelings at the same time, and the market started picking up again.
I think you're right. I think there's that pent up energy. People are just tired of being at home. So now you're an essential service, but you're saying your office actually was closed. You guys were working from home for the most part, other than when you were showing homes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we had to stay open for cashing checks for deposits and things like that. So we would typically have somebody coming by the office twice a day to look after those types of things, offers and that sort of thing. But we were completely virtual, and we can conduct ourselves virtually fairly simply. We've done that for a long time, so it wasn't a real shift for us. It wasn't like we had to figure out how to operate our business without a building. It was just frankly that we're so collegial, like many people in the industry. We just wanted to see one another, and we missed the client engagement too, right? And so yeah, you're right. It was so nice to get back out and see people in the community. And I just think personally, there were days that went by where I was working from home and I didn't even leave the house. Like that's not healthy, right? And I think collectively as a community, we all realized that hey, listen, you know what? there is a risk out there and it is serious, but at the same time, so is our mental and physical health, and we need to look after those things too.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you recently have gotten some really strong offers. So does that mean that home values have not necessarily declined? Have they increased since the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that. We've been in a fairly balanced or buyer's market since about 2010. As you well know, Alberta's had a tough time through many changes over the last decade with oil prices and difficulties with our economy. And that's manifested in real estate prices not appreciating in any real measurable way here in southern Alberta in that time frame. That said, one of the fears that a lot of our sellers had in the beginning, back in March, was that there would be a dramatic depreciation in property values in a very near term. And that really didn't show up for us. We're seeing properties transact at approximately the same prices that they would have earlier in the spring. I think that competitiveness in the marketplace and those multiple offers was more a matter of demand, buyers kind of anxiously waiting for sellers to put this right property up on the market and then acting very quickly. But that didn't necessarily have a change on prices.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So, Courtney, what is the average home price now in Lethbridge?
Yeah, so we're about 285 when you look across southern Alberta, Lethbridge specifically, and that's been fairly consistent for a while. One of the things that skews the average house price in a market will tend to be the number of properties that are sold above the average and below the average. So I think what we're going to see this year, if we kind of try to predict how things are going to go, and this is also related to some of the mortgage changes that happened through the B20 legislation and some of the things that have just recently come out. We'll likely see some of the more expensive properties stagnate a little bit, possibly not transact, and maybe those folks withdraw from the market. So that could potentially just pull that statistic down a little bit. It's not necessarily reflective of the overall values in our marketplace. It just means that there's not as much uptake of those listings, let's say in the 5, 6, or 800,000 range. And not to say that they don't sell, but the volume of those particular type of listings in a year like this might not be as high as it was last year, for example.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So you mentioned 285 is about the average price, but what price range is selling the most currently?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of activity once you get up to about $350,000. Once you go above that, it does slow down a little bit. And we've sold properties, well north of that. I mean, we've sold a couple properties over $1 million already this year. So those properties are transacting. It's just the volume of them isn't quite what it might have been in another year. So right up to about 350, I would say there's good action, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit after that. You just got to adjust your expectations in terms of the time on market and how long it might take to find an attracted buyer if you're listing, say, a $500,000 or $600,000 house.
Interesting. And where are the interest rates headed these days?
Yeah, great question also. So interest rates are right around 3% plus or minus, depending on a few different variables. They're again all-time low. In times like this, the government's motivated to keep money in the markets. They want to keep people spending. They want to make sure that there's some liquidity out there. And so they're making money accessible to people. And as you know, there's lots of programs for businesses and for families to kind of keep people afloat during these difficult times. And they want to make sure that mortgages are affordable as well. Now, there's a little bit of shyness out there in terms of the qualification criterion. So they've tightened up in some of those ways a little bit just to make sure that they're doing additional income verification, making sure that people are still employed, even though they might have been laid off for a little while. So they're doing extra due diligence. But indeed, the prices of mortgage rates are incredible. So we're saying to everybody, hey, listen, if you're secure in your position and you're thinking about making a move, I know every realtor says this all the time, but really money's never been cheaper. So it is a great opportunity for that.
That's interesting. So what advice would you have for, like, say, a young couple trying to get things together to buy their first home? What do they need to do to get things in place financially?
One of the most important things that a person can do is just save. I think in our society, we're so drawn by things that we see on Facebook and Instagram, and you can buy pretty well anything with a couple touches of your phone on Amazon, and it's so easy to spend money. And I think collectively as a society, we've really gotten away from saving. And so one of my personal hopes that this pandemic has brought on. At least in my hope is that it'll create a generation of savers. And so my advice to any young person is to make sure that you're saving 10, 15% of your income, put it away, just pretend that it doesn't exist, save that money. It might take you a year to save up money to buy your first home, but it is one of the best investments. And even if we're not in a market where properties are appreciating dramatically, the fact is that it's still substantially cheaper than renting, and you've got a place to call home forevermore. And it can begin one of those things that sets you up for a very successful life and a successful retirement. So we're big advocates of that. And I think one of the other small pieces that people don't realize, especially when they're younger, they'll begin that saving process and they'll start to feel that they've got some cash in the bank and they feel really encouraged by that. So then they go out and buy a quad or buy a truck or a boat or something. And of course, those things have a dramatic impact on your ability to qualify for the mortgage when the time comes. So what we say is, buy your boat the day after you take possession of your house. You want that new truck? Just wait till the day after you've moved into your house. It's much easier to get financing on a new vehicle than it is to get financing on a mortgage. So just defer those big purchases until after you've already taken possession, because you'll still get qualified, but it might not work the other way around.
Wow, that is great advice. Thank you so much for that. Courtney, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Take good care.
That is Courtney Atkinson, real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates here in Lethbridge.